A reading from the book of Psalms, Psalm number 90. God, you've been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. You turn us back to dust and say, "Turn back, you mortals, for 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday when it is past, or like a watch in the night." You sweep them away, they are like a dream, like grass that is renewed in the morning. In the morning it flourishes and is renewed, in the evening it fades and withers. We are consumed by thoughts of your anger. Ideas of your wrath overwhelm us. You have set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your countenance. For all our days pass away under your knowledge. Our years come to an end like a sigh. The days of our life are 70 years, or perhaps 80 if we're strong. Even then their span is only toil and trouble. They are soon gone and we fly away. Who considers your power? Teach us to count our days, that we may gain a wise heart. Turn, O God, how long will this continue? Have compassion on your servants. Satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love, so that we may rejoice and be glad all our days. Make us glad as many days as we have been afflicted, as many years as we have seen evil. Let your work be manifest to your servants and your glorious power to their children. Let the favor of our God be upon us and prosper for us the work of our hands. O prosper the work of our hands. May God's wisdom be ours this day. How do you measure your days? What's the shape of them? I've heard often newly retired people notice how their time shifts. Weekends have less significance, for example. Holidays become like every other day unless something special is planned. And sometimes we get a sense of that during summer vacation when schedules open up and have room. But I think for more of us, the COVID-19 pandemic has significantly altered our sense of days and weeks, especially when it closed down schools and workplaces. I've heard lots of people struggling to keep track of what day it is exactly, because the schedules we used to use to measure our days just disappeared, as if overnight, some of them. I'm no longer preaching this sermon on a Sunday, but I have to do it on a different day so that it's ready for you on a Sunday. And we've seen frustration about that bubble up and over, with pressure to get things back to normal, and then resistance about getting things back to whatever would be normal. I think it's interesting that in these days we have a group of people whose lives are busier than they have ever been. If you manage a grocery store, perhaps, or if you're a school administrator, if you work in public health. Many of us noticed what happened when Dr. Brent Rusin decided that he would like to take a vacation, and he couldn't. It's hard to believe he had a full-time job before COVID-19, because it appears to be all he can do now. And then there is this other group of people who are at home, who are wishing for things to fill their time and their days. And they know their health is safest if they stay at home, and all of the community activities they used to do anyway are suspended. They've cleaned out every cupboard. They've tended their balcony flower pots, and they're really tired of what's on TV. And then there is a smaller but significant group of people for whom this new world really hasn't changed a whole lot. In some cases, because they were already isolated. Perhaps it's good we've noticed. And in some cases, because their particular lifestyle was already pretty COVID-friendly. And yet, people from all three of these groups of people have indicated to me that their sense of time has somehow shifted. What time is it, and where has the time gone? Well, as we continue our series exploring Psalms this summer, I noticed that there are a couple of Psalms that have something interesting to say about this. Psalm 31 says, "My time is in your hands." And Psalm 90 explores the concept of time, our time and God's time. 1,000 years in your sight is like yesterday, just a day that has passed. Teach us to count our days that we may apply our hearts to wisdom. Help us make the most of the brief time that is ours in this life. In the church, we use these two concepts of time, and we use Greek words to describe them. Chronos, like in chronological, that's clock time. Minutes, hours, days, weeks. And then there is kairos. Kairos is quality time, God's time. It's what we mean when we say things like, it's just the right time, or the perfect time, or there was a moment that changed everything, or it's an opportune time. Could be a spark of insight just for a single brief moment, right? Or an extended period of growing clarity, or it might even be describing the kind of experience when things seem to stand still and don't move at all. That's kairos. When we speak of God's time, that's kairos, the space where the temporary and the eternal come together. Now, we don't know exactly what kind of statement of faith the Hebrew writer was trying to make in Psalm 31 when he said, "My time is in your hands." But when I'm saying it, I'm not saying that I think God controls the chronos clock of my life. Accidents happen. They're not engineered or prearranged in some way. As people working together, we have the ability to restrict the effect of COVID-19 or exacerbate it, depending on what we do and how we act. So I don't think it's wise for us to just throw up our hands and say, "Over to you, God," and go about things as we used to. That's not what faith is asking of us in this moment. On the other hand, I do think we are invited to discover God's presence in the midst of these moments, these unprecedented times. See our time in the context of God's bigger picture and figure out where the kairos is. How do we do that? Well, Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann pulls out yet another Greek word to help us think about how we understand our time. He suggests that many of us, maybe most of us, are unthinkingly committed to a certain understanding of time that he calls Promethean. That is, we've come to regard time as something to fill, to master, to control, to plan out with an aim of achievement, accomplishment, success, making it better, and perhaps money making, which is not the same necessarily as making a living. And so, if that's the case, the pandemic frustrates us because it limits our ability to accomplish and achieve and possess. I can relate to that. And he says that Psalm 31 bears witness to another kind of time that he calls covenantal. And so he talks about this placing our time in God's hands and says that when we think about that in terms of our relationship with God, then we are freed from the burden and the pressure and the insatiable need to produce in our time. And if we can let that go, we don't have to worry about whether we've done enough. And we can center on just being rather than constantly doing. He talks about having this confident peaceableness that allows us to let go of our obsessive self-interest enough to notice and care about others. He asserts that when we lift up and cultivate Sabbath, we bear witness to this covenantal time. I think we see this too in Psalm 90, because in that psalm, the psalmist expresses quite a lot of discouragement about the limits of our lives. Like in the middle of the psalm, there's this feeling of melancholy and apathy and world weariness. The days of our lives are 70 years, even 80 if we're strong, but all that the years bring is toil and trouble. They are soon gone and we fly away. It is that bringing to voice what Brueggemann calls Promethean frustration, that we're not making enough of it. Of course, it's also an acknowledgement that sometimes life is just tough. Time, in God's hands or not, contains pain. And I expect that you've had a moment or two over the past months, maybe every moment or two over the past months, where you have felt a sense of despair or discouragement about the state of the world in this time. But the psalmist, the discouraged psalmist, doesn't end there. He prays to see his time as covenantal, so that he can be a person of joy, that we may rejoice and be glad all our days, no matter what they contain. They may be brief in the span of time, but may they be joyful and meaningful. Prosper the work of our hands, it says. Again, not in that accomplishing kind of way, but in the way that you know that what you do is worth it, makes a difference, matters. Well, I've been considering these things, shifting my view, or trying to shift my view from my very Chronos, Promethean kind of ways into being more covenantal and kairos. And I came across this fantasy novel for young readers called The Lost Track of Time by Paige Britt. And I noticed that it is also asking similar questions as these ancient psalms. It's not the same as a psalm at all, although it's filled with over-the-top characters, silly wordplay. It tells the story of Penelope, a very overscheduled young woman. Her mother is energetic and ambitious and organized. I see myself in her. And she sees that no time is wasted in Penelope's day, backs up her plans with quotations from Poor Richard's Almanac. There's no time for daydreaming or writing or visiting with the neighbor, Miss Maddie, since, as Penelope's mother says, time isn't free. Well, Penelope realizes that her mother's determined plans for her life are drying up all of her good ideas. But then one day, she sees in her calendar that there is this one day that is miraculously blank. And she falls through it into a whole new place called the realm of possibility. And it's a whole new world. The evil Kronos has taken over the land, has banished the great Moodler, who had previously filled the world and its people with a sparkling rainbow of daydreaming and possibilities. Penelope and her new friend Dill attempt to find the great Moodler and stop the destruction of the natural world and complete enslavement of its population to the clock. And they have a lot of adventures that involve quite a lot of terrible but quite enjoyable puns. It's whimsical, ridiculous, and clever. And it asks good questions about our approach to the clock, how we use the time we've been given. One of my favorite quotations is at one point the great Moodler says, "Time isn't precious, Penelope. You are. As long as you remember that, you'll use time wisely." It occurs to me that this perhaps is the key to finding a heart of wisdom as we count our days. If we merely count their number, we may find them lacking. But in the view of God's time, or Kairos time, we start with a relationship. This is the gift of the Psalms to begin with, isn't it? Psalms are conversations, honest, frank conversations. They are covenantal because they assume a relationship. Time isn't precious. You are. When time is used in the service of people, kairos and covenant shape our days. And whether they are full or comparatively empty right now. When we truly value God's creation, we will discover the answer about how God would like us to choose and use our time. Well, in these strange times, unprecedented, people say, may all your days be sacred. And may our God in time be with you. Amen.